Ellen DeGeneres went from being one of the most loved people in Hollywood to one of the most hated, and now she announced her career is over and she's fleeing the US. And Ellen DeGeneres was born in Louisiana, but after her parents split up and her mom remarried, she moved to Texas. And Ellen did deal with hardship early on, where when she was a teenager, her mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And to make things even worse, this created a problem where Ellen DeGeneres' stepdad began molesting her, feeling her breasts, saying he was checking her for lumps. And Ellen said when she was 15 years old, she ran away from home because her stepdad tried breaking into her bedroom one night to assault her. And for years, that created a rift with Ellen DeGeneres and her mom, where she didn't actually take her side and believe her until 18 years later. To this day, Ellen DeGeneres' former stepsister Rory Rhodes has called Ellen a liar, saying she never was actually assaulted by her father and she just told that story to try and get attention for a show. Ellen DeGeneres leaving home put her in a position of poverty, where because of that she was working multiple waitress jobs while also pursuing stand-up comedy. That led Ellen into acting, where she did her first ever movie Coneheads, which just by this image you can guess was probably a huge failure, where it only made $21 million on a budget of $30 million. Still, because of Coneheads, it led to Ellen DeGeneres being hired by Disney to lead Ellen's Energy Adventure, which was a ride they did for the Epcot ride at Disneyland. It was a science-inspired trivia show that Ellen led for the Epcot ride, which regularly had guests like Bill Nye the Science Guy, and millions of people saw Ellen DeGeneres hosting the show every year when they went to Disney. That led Ellen DeGeneres to a new level of fame that she was trying to take to TV, but the problem was to get a hit TV show, with the first attempt being a show called Open House, but that was canceled after just 24 episodes. And then Ellen DeGeneres tried again with another sitcom she was on the main cast of called Laurel Hill, but that was such a big failure it only went for 5 episodes, even though they filmed 10 of them. But even though the show Laurel Hill was awful, Ellen DeGeneres ended up benefiting from it because she was the only one of the main cast critics actually liked, saying she was the breakout star. So because of this, when ABC canceled Laurel Hill, they decided to do a new show with Ellen DeGeneres in the lead called These Friends of Mine. But the show These Friends of Mine ran into some issues because the show Friends came out that same year on NBC, which was getting higher ratings. Because of this, they ended up retooling the series to make it clear that Ellen DeGeneres was the main character, and they also renamed the show in the second season to Ellen. In the second season, Ellen did become a huge hit, becoming the 13th most watched show on TV with 21 million viewers per episode on average, putting it below Friends, which was number 1 at 31 million. But then in season 4, the show had its biggest episode ever, which was the puppy episode, which got 44 million viewers, but it was due to controversy. Where before the puppy episode, Ellen DeGeneres was straight to the public, where she had this person named Jonathan Shakir who'd show up to events with her, and many people thought that was her boyfriend. But Jonathan was actually just a beard for Ellen DeGeneres, and he was completely aware she was a lesbian, but just agreed to go to events with her so the press wouldn't speculate she was gay. That's why the puppy episode was such a big deal, because it was the first time Ellen DeGeneres ever came out to the public as being a lesbian, which did shock the world, but sadly it awakened a lot of bigotry as well. Where Laura Dern, who did the coming out episode with Ellen, faced so many death threats afterwards she had to hire a private security team, and also she didn't book any work for 2 years after. When Laura Dern was filming an episode of Oprah to talk about the puppy episode, they actually both had to be evacuated because someone called in making a bomb threat. That's because during the time it was sadly stigmatized to be gay on TV, with one example being the character Klinger from MASH, who was originally written to be gay, but then they repurposed the character to make him a straight man pretend to be gay because they were afraid what people would think. And when MASH did introduce a gay character for a single episode named George, who was a soldier being beaten up by other soldiers for being gay, it led to public backlash and some boycotts on the show. After the puppy episode, Ellen DeGeneres as well as the rest of the team dealt with bigotry, where ABC said she couldn't get a raise as well as the rest of the cast because advertisers were pulling from the show. Because of parents groups, they had to put viewer discretion advised on new episodes of Ellen, which caused the ratings to tank, and eventually the show got canceled. Ellen taking the risk to come out did ultimately help the gay community, because Will and Grace came out just a year later in 1998, and by 2000 they were pulling 22 million viewers per episode. Because of the success of Will and Grace, Ellen DeGeneres decided to do a new sitcom again with The Ellen Show in 2001, but that was a massive failure, where even though they filmed 18 episodes, they only aired 13 and the reviews were just bad. In 2003, Ellen DeGeneres' luck changed, where she did have a talk show which was a hit, ended up going for 3,339 episodes, and she was also making $50 million a year by 2021. And in 2020, Ellen DeGeneres was the highest paid person on TV, but while the pandemic was going on, her doom was going on Twitter. And that was because Kevin Porter had a viral tweet that 70,000 people liked in the first day, saying Ellen DeGeneres was the worst person he ever worked for and challenged former employees to come out against her. It worked, where dozens of former Ellen DeGeneres employees came out against her, saying they weren't allowed to even make eye contact with her when they were working for her. There was one case where a former Ellen DeGeneres employee, while pregnant, said she was going to change jobs, and because of that, Ellen fired her, costing her health insurance. It surfaced that Ed Glavin, who was one of the producers for the Ellen DeGeneres show, was sexually harassing female employees and had 46 complaints against him. But Ellen DeGeneres ended up siding with her producer despite the sexual harassment claims, and went against her employees and tried to silence the entire story. And then people began looking at the show Ellen with a much closer eye, and they also noticed a very weird interview between Ellen DeGeneres and Dakota Johnson. Ellen DeGeneres making a joke about not being invited to Dakota Johnson's birthday party, but Dakota responded Ellen was invited but never bothered to even respond. While not the biggest story of the year, that video clip did end up getting over 15 million views on Facebook, which didn't help Ellen's case. Kevin Smith also went against Ellen DeGeneres, saying when he made the movie Chasing Amy, he invited Ellen DeGeneres to the premiere, but she left after 15 minutes because she didn't like the idea of a straight director doing a movie about a lesbian. Because of this, Ellen DeGeneres' ratings collapsed, going down 35%, so she decided to end the show and also not get paid her $50 million a year salary. And Ellen DeGeneres tried to do a stand-up comedy tour, but it was a total disaster with sales being 50% less than what they originally projected. Now, after a 50-year career, Ellen DeGeneres announced that she will be retiring from all work in Hollywood and moving to the United Kingdom, leaving the US to avoid public pressure. And with that, I'm Charles Pearl. Please subscribe to learn something.